Good evening, everyone. My name is David Kent, and this is the St. Thomas Poetry Series, which has been holding poetry readings since 1988. And I'd like to welcome you here tonight to hear two well-known and established poets who will be reading from recent publications of theirs, which weren't unfortunately launched because of COVID. And in fact, we've had a hiatus of 3 years between readings as well. So this is a new beginning, an in-person reading. However, in addition to you in the church, we are also transmitting this via the internet to interested folks, we hope, across the country and beyond. So I welcome them as well to this broadcast. I want to thank a couple of people, Jake Lamb and Bob Kennedy, first of all, for the setup here to livecast this. I'm also very pleased that John Franklin is here. He is the Executive Director of IMAGO, which is an organization that supports Christians in the arts. And he is an admirer, I think, of both of these writers, and will no doubt have acute things to say when he introduces them, and he's going to introduce each of them separately as we go forward. So I will turn it over to John now, I think, and we'll get started. John Franklin.
Well, thank you, David. And 1988, did you say? That's good. IMAGO turned 50 this year, so we're a little older than you, but that's a distinguished history, I think. Soon will be time for celebration. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you this evening, and I thank David for inviting me to introduce Dawn and John this evening. I have known them for a good while, and it's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to say just a few words about them. The 18th century philosopher John Hammond noted that poetry is the mother tongue of the human race. And I think there's an insight here about how we reach for words, non-prosaic words, but words that will express our deepest feelings, describe or give some account of our human longings, and articulate what is often just our ordinary experience. Memorable experiences, but they articulate it in a very special way if we do it poetically. I want to say we have two guests this evening who are fluent in that mother tongue of poetry. I've known Don for a number of years and have been glad to have him read his poetry at IMAGO evenings, several IMAGO evenings, I would say. Don is a great advocate for poetry and for poets. And I think there are many who he has mentored and many who have appreciated the kind of energy and commitment that you have to promote and encourage people who are interested in both writing poetry and reading poetry. Dawn is the author of 5 poetry collections, including Ampersand, Conspiracy of Light, poems inspired by the legacy of C.S. Lewis, and his new book, Angelicus. All of those are from Cascade Books and are readily available. Don is also poet in residence at McMaster Divinity College, and he is also the series editor for Poema Poetry Series, where he has edited more than 30 poetry collections, 3 anthologies, and every poem in his new collection, interestingly, is written in the voice of an angel. You might say, how many of us have heard the voice of an angel? Well, tonight we will at least get a rendering of what angels have to say. Poet Denise Levertov once claimed that the poet's goal, and I quote, is to live with the door of one's life open to the transcendent, the numinous. And I think there's a sense in which, well, both of these poets tonight do that. But I want to just say specifically, Dawn, you're doing that when you're speaking to us through this angelic voice that you've been writing about. Today, we witness a good deal of dissatisfaction in a flattened world. We're not happy with it. It consists of what we can see, analyze, and explain. And we're dissatisfied with a disenchanted reality. Somehow we long for an enchanted world. What Dawn's new collection of poetry, Angelicus, invites us to is not only to entertain the possibility of angels, but to attend to what they have to say, which is interesting. These mysterious beings show up in the biblical narrative, and they seem to bridge the gap between time and eternity. And let me just footnote here, I think that art does that in some way. All art does that. Bridges this gap between time and eternity. In his new collection of poetry, then, Dawn invites us to meet some of these angels, these angelic folks, and hear what they have to say. Dawn, we are grateful for you and for your very committed advocacy for poetry in the Canadian scene. And I'm sure that there could be many people here tonight who would want to thank you for all that you do. We're grateful that even in the midst of promoting others, you have time, energy, and creative imagination to continue to create your own poetry. And we're delighted that we're going to be able to hear some of that this evening. So please join me in welcoming Dawn Martin.
Thank you, John. It is a privilege to be here, a privilege to have John introduce me so generously. I mean, I am such a fan of him and his work and what he and Marion have done and continue to do, so it is quite the honor. It's good to be standing here in front of you after all this time, to be able to present my poetry, and it's an honor and a pleasure. I thank those of you who've come, and I think with all the traffic and everything else, it was a little more difficult getting here than probably most of us anticipated. But I also want to thank those who are watching online, because I had quite a number of friends who aren't in the Greater Toronto area who said they were going to be watching. So I think I'll just send a little shout out to them. Gloria and I are friends, Ian and Margaret, who moved to this town called Sterling. If you don't think you know where that is, you're right. Anyway, I also want to say hello to Nellie in Michigan, to Marjorie in Pennsylvania, to Sarah in Winnipeg, to Lori and Susan, who are both watching from Washington State, another Susan in British Columbia, to Andrew in Perth, Australia, and to Rena in Singapore. So yes, the restrictions of COVID have changed our world, but in interesting ways so that we're reaching quite beyond where we could have reached before. So even the storms and the traffic and the construction in the city of Toronto can't shut this down. So, as John mentioned, my latest collection is called Angelicus, and it's different from any other book I've written, again, because it's written in the voice of angels. This deserves some explanation, but before I do that, I'm just going to read one poem for you. This one, I think, might be the very first one I wrote for this collection. It's called An Angel's View of Automobiles. Before they talk to their cars, they talk to their horses. Not just the giddy up and whoa or the clucking tongue, but the patter of shared days, busy streets, unending rain. At least a cart horse could sense meaning from the tone of a familiar voice. A mare could mimic the melancholy of a burdensome journey in her plodding clip-clop, or mirror excitement in an equestrian canter. But now they speak to cold machinery, take directions from a disembodied voice. There's nothing of the animal-human bond, no consciousness like that of Balaam's ass to save his life from the angel's sword, nothing about a car that can transport like Elijah's fiery chariot. Before they talked to their cars, some of them even talked with God. And so I believe an angel would see what they would see as important is what shines through. Their commentary on our day-to-day, they would be definitely seeing the heavenly perspective on these things. One of the things we as poets do is we take unfamiliar things and make them comprehensible, at least to us. And in contrast, another thing we do is we take familiar things and we make them startling and maybe even confusing so that we view them with fresh eyes. I attempt both of these with my angel poems. The only resource I've drawn on to talk to you about angels are the Old and New Testaments. So I have avoided letting cream cheese commercials instruct me in this matter. At no point do any of the biblical authors, though, stop and explain angels to us. They simply share stories of a universe that's inhabited by animals, by humans, and by these uniquely spiritual beings. Throughout the biblical account, we hear about angels, about guardian angels, about punishing angels, and especially messenging angels. We usually forget that the word angel actually means messenger. An angel prevented Abraham from killing Isaac. An angel visited Daniel beside the Tigris River. The angel Gabriel communicated with Mary that she would be the mother of God's son. And in one dream, an angel encouraged Joseph to wed Mary, and in another warned Joseph to take Mary and the child and flee to Egypt. This poem is called Angelic Manifestations. I could startle you awake, a surprise in the night, or as an angel of light, I might trouble your dream with my oration. I could go where I'm bidden, hidden in the guise of a man, a strong-armed warrior, flowing hair and flaming sword, aglow as a shimmering youth, or as a fabulous creature with multiple faces, wheels, lightning, horns, and wings, going wherever the four winds blow. I could come in the clouds in a chariot of fire, appearing according to his desire, attuned to the triunity's call and send, at a time, in a way, expected least. A single hand cannot applaud, but as an uninvited guest at Belshazzar's feast, in midair on his wall, I inscribed the graffito of God, bringing a dynasty to its end. I spent a lot of time reflecting on how angels might view our world, and this next one is called What an Angel Admires. Is my fascination with the subtle dappling of a full forest confusing to you? Or the way I still myself on a pinnacle where dawn radiates across undulating desert? You think your fields beneath me, in more than a literal sense? Or expect the way your villages wrap around the hillside will be of no interest? You partner with the cliff edge, with cypress, wall, and wisteria, building from local stone an admirable life, in harmony with all you've been given. Oh, if you saw how the eye-blue tinge of your home floats in space, you'd feel its lyrical pull. And so an angel would look at God's creation and the ways he made us to interact with it, and would see the beauty in every aspect of this which we probably take for granted. This next one is called An Angel Marvels at Human Language. Right from the start, imitating and experimenting as infants, once flailing fingers fail, you gurgle and burble your way toward words. You humans are all language makers, linguistic babblers, jabberers, and risk-takers. Though you're lower than angels, we delight in your inventions. You name every game you play, place descriptors on the tall and the small, have a name for every animal and every animal call, teased from sound, shape, and associated word. A glorious onomatopoetic cock-a-doodle-doo, drawn from every encountered hullabaloo. And not just one for the whole world, for in every language or dialect, every valley identified on its own, even every household, there's a different way to say something. To the south, cattails sway, and further north, bulrushes wave in the wind, while certain purists firmly insist these terms are misapplied. When Yahweh brought the man to the table to name each creature, we gathered to hear what each would be. Now we see this was just a start, how you're able to label and relabel every person, place, or part, how you're so prone to classify every rock and reptile, infection and infraction. Your heart must believe you'll tame through these names all they signify. The angels in my poem are not always trying to explain their point of view. Sometimes they reveal their surprise at what to them was unexpected. And this poem is called Learning to Fly. An angel reflects on human discovery. Before they knew how to fly, they watched birds, all that flap and flutter of feathers. A boy once tried it himself, Icarus-like, but with less immediate success, hauling himself to the top of a wall only to fall over and over again, but at least without the plummet into the blue Mediterranean. Whenever the maker laughed, "Watch this," delighted by their contraptions rattling along the beach, for us, the angels who've never had to learn, it was like watching them struggling to reach God, lifted on the wind of the Spirit, but tripping when some preacher tied their shoelaces together. The boy wondered whether angels have feathers, though knew little of wind and even less of weightlessness. Leonardo tried many things, knowing how to look and guess and learn from every fall, perhaps knowing how God loves a puzzle, the biggest, an intricate universe made oh so discoverable. One thing I enjoyed doing was taking familiar, shall I say, Sunday school stories and retelling them from how an angel would have seen them. This one's called Jacob Wrestles. No one person had seen the encounter, for Jacob had sent them all across the Jabbok toward his brother's sword. Now in the descending dark, on that stream's eastern shore, having long struggled with himself, he now faced the angel of the Lord. As he braced himself for certain defeat, only angels watched. And we wondered why it wasn't over in a heartbeat. The animal gasps of God and man told us what the shadows tried to hide. The moon then rose on what's hard to describe. The fear, in angelic yet physical form, locked in the grip of mere man. Jacob jabbed and grabbed and daringly refused to let go, and received a kind wounding, a fierce lesson in prayer. And this one's called The Burning Heart. An angel addresses a king. You carefully construct your heart. Surround it with aqueducts and gardens. Place it in gold casing, concealing its flame. Raise high your name. Raise your image higher, lifting up, never burning down, except those distant, resistant cities and towns, and now these few who refuse the slight due you require. Your dire arsonist heart doesn't differentiate. Melts white-hot metal, burns wood, scorches skin. Exponentially higher you turn up the heat to have 3 defiers cast in. Nothing can survive your blast, and yet you see a 4th figure has joined the other 3, an angel walking with them in the heart of the fire. I have made an effort throughout Angelicus to permit my angels to have individual personalities. I mean, after all, they're not emotionless beings. I permit them curiosity at the way we humans behave, impatience at human disbelief, compassion for those in need, anger at the exploitation of the poor, and annoyance at our misrepresentation of angels. And we do misrepresent them a lot, from ancient art right through to It's a Wonderful Life. Throughout these poems, even when I'm having fun, I seek to express something deeper. This poem is about a sappy pop song from the early 60s called Teen Angel. Do you know it? Teen angel, can you hear me? Teen angel, can you see me? Are you somewhere up above? And are you still my own true love? Pretty bad, eh? Okay, here we go. Teen angel. An angel gets annoyed by a pop song. What is it about your little girlfriend, O child of clay, that makes you sing of her as an angel? Is she a terrible being of fire and light, able to mete out destruction and death? Does God's judgment linger on her breath? Her foresight seems far from prophetic. Her insight? Pathetic. Rushing back to the car broken on the tracks for some sentimental token? It fits for a hit record, but in a limited way. For when 8,100 tons of rushing steel steals her earthly future, why wouldn't that fling away the ring clutched in her fingers? I'm weary of the worn-out up above rhyming with love, and dead dolts in cartoons sprouting wings. Death does not make you higher beings. That's not how it loses its sting. In one of the poems I read earlier, you might have caught me alluding to the landscape of Italian hill towns. Back in 2019, I was teaching a course in ekphrastic poetry in Orvieto, Italy. And yes, I know, John Terpstra gets to go back there this summer. But anyway, being there, of course, influenced me. There are 3 ekphrastic poems, and I should mention that those are poems that interact with visual art, and these that relate to this trip we had and that are in this book, Angelicus. One of them is based on a painting in the San Brizio Chapel in Orvieto. Another is from a fresco in the Basilica in Assisi. And the third one is from an altarpiece my wife and I saw in the Church of San Luigi de Francesi in Rome. The poem is called An Angel Critiques Caravaggio's St. Matthew and the Angel. As rich as it is, his paintings misconceived, depicting what humanity is not able to perceive. Overlook the anachronisms of latter-day bench and table, and replacing Matthew's parchment with a book. Ignore the appealing bedsheet draping the angel, who seems perplexingly suspended from a ceiling hook, and even the twisted angle at which the writers must look. The inspiration that was given isn't something he'd heard, as if recited to him word for word, but what the altarpiece alters. What troubles me most is, would heaven merely send an angel to do the work of the Holy Ghost? Since we are approaching Advent, so let me say pre-Advent, I thought it would be suitable for me to read a poem entitled Pre-Annunciation. This poem invites you to think about a Gabriel who's far more like someone you can identify with than the strangely other being that we usually think of when we think of angels. For here he's strategizing on a street corner how he's going to approach Mary to present his message to her. This is called pre-annunciation. She seems like a shadow. No luminosity to her. A village girl in the village gloom. What might she say as I enter the room, bringing a brightness beyond her ken? I scan the street until I've caught her, wait and watch as she returns with water from the town's only well. I don't want to astound her, make her flee in fear, or confound her with things she'll hear. How will she receive my greeting as I tell she's highly favored? How will I enable her to see? Might she think she's unsavory, too lowly, too young? Or simply submit and say, let it be? So anyway, in this collection, there are poems which speak about sword-wielding angels, including the angel of death in Egypt, and I also have the angel of death at the Grand Ole Opry. I also have written of the mysterious appearance of four-faced cherubim, which have an eagle face, an ox face, a human face, and a lion face. Such mysteries are meant to make us draw near and wonder. So what do I want you to take away with you this evening besides the enjoyment of poetry? What do I want my readers to grasp? Well, in part, I want to cause us to be more conscious of the transcendent reality that is always around us. In part, I want to re-inject strangeness into scriptures that for some of us have become too familiar. But also, as in pre-annunciation, to help us to relate better to what we've seen from a distance. In part, I want to help us, and I include myself in this too, to be more open to mystery and to shun our easy answers. Of course, these things aren't quick takeaways. These things take time. And poetry is helpful in slowing us down for meaningful reflection. I have two more poems I'm going to share with you. This one is about something we all think or most of us anyway, think we have some idea about, but here we're looking at it from a different perspective. It's called An Angel Explains Prayer. You make the simple so complicated, little one. But then to explain, I may need to make it more complicated still. It involves the Master's triunity, how number 3 translates, and number 2 advocates, though number 1 knows what's going on before a word is said. It's like when you whisper, "Dear God, I carry your intentions to the skies," although it's not me carrying them at all. 1 million angels circle the Master, besides the 6-winged seraphim who are always singing praise. Each has their prayer burdens to share, but when I arrive, it's like a tornado that can't touch me. All's a blur in the whirl of wings and wonder. There's a hum of voices and trumpets, and then his eyes lock on mine. And nothing else is there but your prayer and his compassionate stare. Simply put, you speak, and without interrupting a single raindrop in mid-fall, the universe, and everything beyond the universe, more than stops, has stopped, ceases in anticipation of ceasing. And the magnitude of magnitude, the magnificence of magnificence, bends, enthralled with your turning in his direction, with the very sigh of your being drawn heavenward. Prayer, too, little one, is when he reaches out to you, but by that point you've usually lost focus, distracted by his apparent silence, your prayer's eloquence, or perhaps the fine design of your shoes. The final poem I'm going to read for you is the last one that's in the book here. And it's an extended metaphor for faith, although again, from the perspective of an angel. This is called Surreal Orchid. An angel speaks of faith. Picture an orchid, one you can physically feel, planted in your very physical body. Roots reach through your liver, kidneys, spleen, stabilize their organic soil. Leaves, though hidden, spread their curving green while the stem and branches branch and bloom into your heart and lungs. Fill your every breath with holy fragrance, your heartbeat with resonance. As buds form on branch tips and buds turn to blossoms, the blossoms, though unseen, make life gleam. This is not to say some haven't suffered dormant seasons when the inner orchid seems like a dried out stick. For some, this drives them to despair, to deny the orchid's even there, to kick hope aside and suppress its eventual renewal with a gloved hand, shoving the dream of tendrils down or ripping any trace from their own throats. Did you know, dear child, nurturing this orchid's your most crucial task? Let it encircle your heart. Let it fill your brain with its delicate fulgor. Let it be the fulfillment to the prayer you most frequently ask. Thank you.
Well, we're at the halfway mark. Do you want to stand up for 15 seconds? Because we're going to have another reader read for us in a moment. So just take a little stretch. There you go. All right. There you go. All right. You know, as Dawn was reading, I always enjoy hearing poetry, and I enjoy reading it as well. I wish I had the gift to be able to write it, but I don't. I was realizing how much, Dawn, you, and indeed you as well, John, in the many times that you have shown up at IMAGO events to read your work, have nudged me to deepen my own engagement with poetry. And I'm very grateful for that. I mean, I've always liked the poetic, and I guess I'm a little bit attuned to it, but whenever I hear you folks, I say, give more time to poetry. And I seek to do that. So thank you to you, Dawn, and thank you to you too, John. I first met John Terpstra, John, I don't know, I'll just say over 20 years ago. And at that time, you were working on a CD of poetry with musical accompaniment. I remember it well, and that CD came out under IMAGO. I should just say to those of you who don't know, and I didn't realize until Dawn, you mentioned it, that we're all over the world tonight, David. It's extraordinary. But just very briefly, IMAGO seeks to be supportive of people of faith in the arts. And we adopt projects and we promote opportunities for artists to bring their wares before a wider public, whether it's poetry or visual art or drama or dance or music, whatever it may be. And it's a great privilege for me to work with artists. And I've enjoyed the times when John has come to read. I remember, John, you read at the 40th anniversary of IMAGO at Glenn Gould Studio. Whenever I listen to John read his work, what I hear is close to music. It has a rhythm and a lilt that makes his rendering of the poems song-like in a way. And it's a way that brings the words to life. Now, to be clear, I don't want anyone to worry that John may sing tonight, although now that Dawn has, it's possible he might do that. But I'm only making the observation that there's a kind of musical quality to your reading, John, that I very much enjoy. The themes that John takes up engage ordinary experiences which he frames for our special attention. And indeed, poetry calls us to special attention, doesn't it? These are brief narratives, glimpses of how we negotiate life, glimpses of what strikes us and how we respond. So let me just give you a bit of a biographical background for John. John has published 11 books of poetry. He's been shortlisted for the Governor General's Award and the Raymond Suster Prize. He's won several Hamilton Arts Books Award, and as well as the Bressani Prize. His 5 works of creative nonfiction, so it's important to understand that John doesn't just write poetry, he's done creative nonfiction as well. They have landed on the short list for the Charles Taylor Prize, an important prize here in Canada, and the BC Prize for Canadian Nonfiction, and he's also won several Hamilton Arts Book Awards. And he notes you can guess where he lives, Hamilton. The St. Thomas Poetry Series has been kind to John, publishing Devil's Punch Bowl, a book of poems, and 2 volumes of prayers, the most recent being Wild Hope. And as I've already noted, in a way, with the assistance of IMAGO, he and pianist Bart Namath produced a CD of poetry and music called Nod Me In, Shake Me Out. The book John will be reading from tonight is the latest from the Gaspro Press in Nova Scotia, his publisher of more than 20 years. And I just want to footnote here, they do beautiful work, Gaspro Press. When I saw your most recent one, I said, here's another one. Beautiful, beautiful publication. Call Me Home is the name of the book, and in it are poems reflective of, he refers to his elevation to the status of grandparent, and other poems that reflect on his neighborhood and neighbors, and one that reflects on nothing more than a housefly. One thinks of Annie Dillard. She does that kind of thing, doesn't she? Anyway, let me add here, there is a brief afterword, writing by feel, where John recounts his personal journey in relation to the typewriter and the keyboard. It's an interesting piece you have at the end of the book, John. Poesis, as I think you will know, is a Greek term meaning to do or to make. John is a woodworker. He crafts wood into beautiful and useful objects, so he's a maker in that sense as well. Tonight, we know him as a crafter of words, shaping words into meaningful order and giving us, who read or hear his work, a fresh glimpse of things. And as poetry is able to do, he opens a portal to discover the new in the familiar. Please welcome John Terpstra to read from his latest book.
It may get dry up here. Will this rise? No, it won't. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming, and thank you, John, for that introduction, and David for hosting this reading and this reading series and the publication series that has run since 1987. Did he say? My book came out in '97, and then the 2 prayer books more recently. I don't plan on singing, but I could tell you that just this week I signed up for a literary cabaret in Hamilton that's going to take place in February, and there's going to be a band, and none of the writers are allowed to read from their works. They have to sing a song. And so I had to choose a song because then the band had to approve it to see whether or not they could play it. And I chose With a Little Help from My Friends. So that'll be mine. And then he wanted to know, was it the Joe Cocker version or the regular version? Anyway, I'm going to read mostly from Call Me Home, the new book, but I'm going to start off with something else first, just because I want to. This first poem is called Confession. Descending into the valley of Borer's Creek on the Ray Lowe's side trail, just past crossing one of the creek's narrow feeders, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob tripped me flat to the ground and hit me with one of his rocks. No ass who balks, refusing to budge another inch toward the flaming angel his rider cannot see, could be more certain than I what had just happened. I am smitten, I told my walking companion, as she gingerly checked for brakes, then offered a hand to help me rise. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has struck me down and thrown an earth-embedded rock against my shoulder that will leave a bruise I'll feel for days. And I love it, although I do not love that this intervention was called for. My inmost thoughts had reached a fork in their path, and the moment I chose, on impulse, which path to follow, the next I was eating dirt. Forget the details. I chose a path of unkindness, unkindness to others, and to one in particular, and was about to give shape and body to this unkindness in words, words, which are my gift and my delight, my song. Had not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, a kind soul, but one who is not afraid to play rough, had he not, in love and infinite mercy, tripped and planted me face down to taste of the earth from whence I am come, and to which one day I most certainly shall return. So that's my little confession to you all. And this is called Voice from an Abandoned Church on the 7th Concession Road. I said to my God, whatever happened to all the small frame and brick churches that stand upright under the trees and atop low hills beside the rural concession roads? I can still hear the choir of 5 octogenarians singing Old Rugged Cross, their voices off-key and wavering, the congregation sparse and equally aged, one Sunday morning 30 years ago. The singers and parishioners were likely the last of the children of the ones who built these homes of spirit and soul in a countryside newly opened to settlement. And they have long since settled under other rafters below the old rugged crisscrossing of branch against sky, of root against rock, against box, where they lie in the field next door. Whatever happened to their song, their prayer? Where did it fly? I said to my God, am I speaking to the right person? Is their song a leaf on the tree that shades their rest in the hill above the creek? Is their prayer the wing of a bird who no longer nests or announces spring, who may be grown extinct? I said to my God, all this empty air, I'm not getting a reading. Say something. And then the third one in this little trilogy, or what I think of as a little trilogy, is called Everything is Utterance. Brick and wall made of brick, clay that shapes the brick, and bed of clay carved by creek, creek and path the creek follows, path and portage, pavement, tree, and stones that surround the tree atop the hill above the stream that runs between farm fields, diction of all that is visible. I said to my God, quiet one, you are fluent with the material world, its lingo. I hear you speak crow, seagull, speak silver lace, lilac, speak sky, cloud, water. You have always spoken water, its many tongues. Do you also speak plastic? You mouth steel mill steam, white and cumulus, that dissipates the next time I look. You sound wave and wind, hull and mast. I sit balanced on a rock, on the shoreline, between water and land, between thrill and waver. Do you also speak overhead engine noise? Do you speak tinnitus? You speak disease, disability, disaster, grief, the difficult tongues that few are able or choose or desire to learn or understand. Everything is utterance. I think you are one whose silence never stops talking. Water. I am never not nervous giving a reading. This is just a thing. I may have done this a million times, and yet I am never not nervous. It's like a condition, I think. I'm going to read some poems now from Call Me Home. This is a bit of false advertising because I'm showing you the book without its red cover. My publisher, Gaspro Press, does make really nice books, which is a real honor, but there's a fly leaf on it, and the fly leaf gets awkward when you're reading with the book, so I take it off. It'll be the red book on the book table. You'll recognize it. And I'm going to start off with a brief poem that's called Muse. A fly lands 6 black pads beside the pencil point poised ready to skate a gray blade over the ice-white page. The fly rubs its eyes, wings, its eyes again, then pauses, puts the 2 foot pads back down, and together we wait. And as John mentioned, a number of the poems in this book arose out of living in the neighborhood that my wife and I live in, and the fact that we live across the street from a large city park that many people frequent during the day. And this is a poem called Walkers. 4 walkers huddle beneath a tree, waiting out the rain, which promises to be brief and light. Although these days, who knows? It could become another one of those apocalyptic downpours we've had lately that washes all 4 of them through the storm grate out into the lake, where they'd be swimming for their lives, waving their arms and calling for help with whatever strength remained in their battered bodies from whoever remained to offer it, rather than walking out from under the tree as they have done just now, the rain having stopped, their conversation not missing a beat. When you live across a park and you walk in it on a regular basis, then you meet the denizens of the park. And this is a poem that honors one of those denizens, and it's called Sky over Victoria Park. If everyone were to see the clouds this morning, moving across the sky above the park, like frayed angels on parade, it is impossible that they would not want to be better behaved, kinder, help their neighbors, and make use of the exercise equipment to build stronger minds and bodies. Looking up, they'd have to brace themselves so as not to lose balance as they felt the earth roll and turn under their feet. And in the face of this enormous truth that the earth is a big ball, maybe the biggest ball in a world full of balls, which you'd think should make the world a fun place, they'd find that they could not resist the urge to call their brother and reconcile, visit their mother, vote, or say thank you to the driver as they step off the bus with a small terrier dog on a mission to buy food and treats for the pet shelter, with money earned collecting wine and beer bottles for deposit, just as Mike, a park regular, did with Toby, his Scottish, until one night, while reaching into a box of bottles a neighbor had left for him in a dark corner of a porch, his arm was savaged by a raccoon. He quit the mission after that and died, but not because of the raccoon, on the sofa of his apartment in the seniors' tower, and is now in the clouds, having followed Toby, who several weeks earlier had taken the wind out of Mike's will to live sails by dying unexpectedly, and who, I am happy to report, is also in the clouds, chasing a ball with great speed and giant, for a terrier, strides across the morning sky. So this one's a little different now. There's all sorts of things that happen when you live in a neighborhood, some of them good, some of them not so good. This is one that's not so good. It's called Blood Brothers. The thieves who stole 2 bicycles from our shed the other night must have jumped the 6-foot-high fence to get into the yard because the gate was locked. Pretty athletic thieves. One of them must have handed the bikes over the fence to the other. So strong, too. Too bad they haven't found more productive activities to engage in with their bodies. But who knows? Maybe they have families and kids they horse around with on the living room carpet or in the park. And maybe they perform gymnastics on the mattress with their partners. Well, if so, good for them. I don't much care. I'm angry at the loss, the anonymity, and the helplessness that has led to the 2 strands of barbed wire which now adorn the top of that fence, in contravention of municipal bylaws, which apparently I don't much care about either, and that comprise what my brother-in-law John, who owned the more expensive of those bikes, calls a bold aesthetic, but that my wife, Mary, considers urban edginess. Barbed wire is hard to find in the city, I discovered. But one phone call led to another, which eventually led to Peter's Corners and County Ag Supply, invisible behind its parking lot of farm implements, and a man behind the counter who took me into the warehouse and unwound from a spool 80 feet of wire across the concrete floor, cut it, then returned to serve a sudden influx of other customers, leaving me to rewind it into something I could take home. The wire was stiff and treacherous and tried to spring from my grip with each loop that I made, bending to pick up the strand with two hands alternately, one at 3, one at 9. A warehouse worker appeared when I was almost done and tied it at 6 and 12 as I stood there, bleeding a little. The man behind the counter asked as I paid, why the barbed wire? And when I explained, said that he used to live in the city too, and one night, a couple of teenagers, probably drunk, climbed his fence, and he woke in the morning to find one of them floating face down in his swimming pool. You wouldn't believe the trouble that caused, he said. I couldn't tell if he felt sorrier for himself or the kid. So now the wire's up, and a few days have passed, and through some mischief or trick of the psyche, a switch has been flicked, and I've taken to loving my enemy. I feel like loving, not tearing the skin off his buddy or him. It's only a bike, after all, 2 bikes. We purchased replacements the next day, diving straight back into the pool of the local economy, just as they, our thieves, had done in their own criminal way. But the wires remain all the same, for I am also loving to watch the squirrels run and hop unhindered along the fence top between the 2 strands, which, because we lacked the gear to stretch them tight, flaunt their bold urban aesthetic edginess in gentle twisting waves above the straight lines of the fence and look almost benign, kindly, as do these scars of purchase and installation that adorn my arms and that I think of as souvenirs of my thieves, now thwarted, I hope, but with whom I have made a pact and feel an unexpected intimacy, as with brothers I never knew I had. So, I'm going to read you one. I'm the child of immigrants, though I was born here. And it's always a question of how do you become naturalized? Especially now we're asking ourselves these questions in these days of truth and reconciliation, you know? This is called invasive species. They are not native, the Queen Anne's lace, chicory, and bird's foot trefoil that add so much to the country drive as they wave back and forth from the shoulder of the road. Their success, I have read, is measured in how well they adapt to harsh conditions, how they thrive in adverse circumstances. When my parents invaded from overseas, spilling like bilge, like zebra mussels, some would say, from the hold of a boat, they lived in a driving shed attached to a barn. The farmer and the farm work were brutal. my parents did better than survive. The Nature Guide further states that non-native trees may add a green splash to the landscape, but do not attract insects, which are adapted to native trees, and therefore do not interest or attract birds. I stand here, a non-native son, though born on this soil, and walk my walk, banging through the woods, cowbell around my neck, head in a cloud of bugs, birds nesting in my beard, searching for a place that will call me home. Okay, now I'm going to take a drink. Will this be on the live stream too? So yes, in the introduction, John mentioned that I have been elevated to the status of grandparent, grandfather, or as we call it in our native tongue, Opa. Opa. And this poem is called Opa. There is a baby on a blanket, on a picnic table in the shade. But for the loincloth and cap of wild black hair, the baby is naked and laid out like lunch on the picnic table. This is not per se my baby, but were I to pick him up, no one would blink. I could walk around the park, beyond the wading pool, and no one would chase me down. I could steal this baby just as easily as it has stolen me. Where have all my big plans for the day gone? The trees pause and hold their breath as I walk beneath their protection, a sleeping baby's head cradled in my hand like tender fruit. Their applause is muted but sustained. And here is one called Boys. There's two grandsons in question here, and I'm going back and forth in ages, and I can hardly even tell which poem is about which grandson. Boys, throwing sticks into the air, chasing clouds. This is what makes it okay to be rolled over by the westering wagon wheel of time, to be flattened under its forward momentum and pushed down, pressed back into the earth, squished like a bug, like the ant he takes between his 3-year-old fingers, like his daddy does. He must increase and I decrease, as someone once said in a different context. Horsing around on the grass in the park, him running circles as I lie on the ground, then launching himself into the air for me to catch as he flies over and land him softly, safely, a trust to which he gives not a second thought. There will come some tipping point where I can no longer do this or be the receiver and holder of this burning gift. But I never felt so hot and energized, so holy, sainted, so totally bagged and ready for sleep. Don Martin actually was kind enough to publish a few of this minor outpouring of grandchild poems. And one of them was called The 2-Year-Old. So we've gone from baby to 3-year-old to 2-year-old. The 2-year-old. The 2-year-old and I are holding and unholding hands as we make our slow way along the sidewalks of the neighborhood, seeking perfection in all things and finding it. A man gives me the thumbs up before climbing into his truck, and I know that he too is in the club. Graybeards, elders at the gate. We were once like this one too, I shout crazily from across the street, and he nods sagely. I am stupid with love, and fool enough now at last to see how it ever came to be we were forgiven long before we ever knew from sin. And speaking of angels, this one is called Messenger. Apropos of what I know not of, hang on, I'll start over. Apropos of I know not what, but pandemic, while sitting on my lap where we've been playing, making faces and each other laugh, do I make too much? Overdue? His eyes take on more light. He reaches out, lays an open hand softly on my chest, and says, "Calm down." And the room is very bright. And one last poem to end with and on. It's actually the final poem in this book. It came late to the book. The poem that precedes it is actually a poem about the death of a neighbor, and it doesn't end on a happy note. And then during the process of the editing of this book, this poem managed to come to me and slip its way in. And it's called Heaven. Who else died? He asks excitedly, expectantly, as I hoist his dripping, pouring water body from the pool and heave him high as the treetop, the house, the cloud, beyond the moon and up into heaven, where he delights to dwell with his grandpa and his great-grandpa, with Malcolm the dog, Aunt Lucy, and Rick, whom he's been asking after. There's joy in the deep end after splashdown, when the boy comes up, surfaces, and there's light in his eyes as he asks again, who else? We invent heaven to house our loves when they depart and disappear. But heaven is the water that comes to my waist, and a cloud-touching, glad-dunking child of the earth who can't get enough of this reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, John and Dawn. I think you've both given us glimpses of the transcendent through poetry tonight. We are very grateful to you and also to John Franklin for his wonderful introductions to both of your works. And just before we close, I want to encourage you to mark your calendar for our spring poetry event, which is going to be on April the 22nd. We're launching a new book by Bruce Mayer. It's called Church Grammar. And Bruce is going to be joined that evening by two other writers, Leslie and Evans, who has published with us last year, Mute Swan. And also joining her, I can read my notes, Bruce Hunter, who's published a book earlier this year in Italy. It's a bilingual edition with Italian and English parallel to one another in that book. So he's going to launch that book here. So I invite you to make a note of that. That's in the spring, the 22nd of April. Pat Kennedy, Margot Swiss, and Michelle Mayers Van Herk, I thank them also for the help they're giving in the other room with the book table and the refreshments. And I invite you to go to the parish hall through that door, down some stairs, around through another little door, up some more stairs, into the parish hall. And there are some refreshments there. You'll have a chance to meet the writers and purchase some books, we hope. Thank you for coming on this slightly inclement night. And good night and God bless. Thanks.